My name is Zola, 33, and I am the undisputed disappointment of my family. At least, that is the story my mother Patricia loves to tell her elite country club friends. For years, I let them spin their false narrative. I let them think my life was a mess because I refused to play their toxic high society games. But at my sister Bianca's engagement dinner, they pushed their narrative too far. When my mother introduced me to her future in-laws as the daughter who cleans houses for a living, and my father proudly declared they had given up on me, they expected me to shrink. They did not expect the groom's terrifyingly powerful mother to freeze, look me dead in the eye, and whisper my true identity. They did not expect the entire table to lock up, or for all the color to drain from my mother's face. If you have ever been the black sheep who quietly built an empire while your family prayed for your downfall, keep listening. You will want to hear exactly how this dinner ended. The private dining room at the exclusive Buckhead Club smelled of fresh orchids and desperate social climbing. I was standing quietly near the edge of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, wearing a simple but perfectly tailored navy silk dress. Bianca, my younger sister, and the family's undisputed golden child, was holding court in the center of the room. She wore a heavy designer dress covered in crystals that caught the light every single time she laughed, her practiced, breathy laugh. Julian, her wealthy white old money fiancé, stood right beside her, looking appropriately handsome and profoundly arrogant. My parents had spent their entire lives obsessing over status, desperately clinging to their fragile image within their exclusive Atlanta social clubs. Bianca marrying into Julian's highly prestigious aristocratic family was their ultimate victory. My mere presence, however, was treated as a severe threat to their flawless image. As I turned slightly to set my glass down on a nearby table, Bianca suddenly stepped directly into my path. She did not just bump into me by accident. She leaned her shoulder forward, deliberately knocking my elbow with intense physical force. The large glass of dark red wine she was holding tipped over completely, and the dark liquid splashed heavily down the front of my pristine silk dress. "Oh my goodness, Zola, you really need to watch where you are going!" Bianca gasped loudly, making absolutely sure every single face in the room turned toward us. "You are always so incredibly clumsy." Before I could even grab a napkin to dry myself, my mother materialized out of thin air. She did not ask if I was all right. She did not offer me a towel to prevent the stain from setting. Instead, she immediately turned her back to me and rushed toward Julian and his mother Eleanor, who were watching the chaotic scene from the head table. Patricia's face was a careful mask of calculated embarrassment, eager to perform her role as the long-suffering parent dealing with a massive disappointment. "I am so incredibly sorry, Julian Eleanor," my mother cooed, waving a highly dismissive hand in my direction. "Please excuse the ugly disruption. This is our other daughter, Zola. She is not quite used to environments like this one. She cleans houses for a living, just to scrape by, so we try our best to be patient with her complete lack of grace." My father, Marcus, stepped up right beside her, swirling his expensive bourbon with a smug grin. "We have completely given up on her, honestly," he added, chuckling loudly as if my alleged failure was a light-hearted family joke. "But Bianca, well, Bianca is the crown jewel of our home. We focus our energy where it actually pays off in the end." The public humiliation was clearly meant to crush my spirit entirely. I stood there, red wine dripping down my dress, and looked at the faces of Julian's family. Julian smirked, clearly enjoying the toxic power dynamic, completely buying into the false narrative that I was just a worthless maid who scrubbed toilets. But then I looked directly at Eleanor. Eleanor was the ruthless matriarch of Julian's family, a woman who controlled a massive private equity firm on the East Coast. She was terrifying, incredibly sharp, and completely unbothered by Patricia's desperate attempts to impress her. As Patricia and Marcus laughed cruelly at my expense, Eleanor's gaze slowly drifted past them and landed directly on me. Her eyes widened dramatically. The bored indifference vanished entirely from her face. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and visibly shaken. She recognized my face. She knew exactly who I really was. I did not panic or react emotionally. I simply met her terrified stare slowly, raised a single finger to my lips, and gave her a silent, commanding look. Do not say a word. Eleanor swallowed hard. She abruptly stood up from her chair, the heavy wooden legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The sudden sound cut through my parents' laughter like a sharp knife. The entire table went dead silent. Patricia and Bianca froze, their smiles faltering as they watched Eleanor bypass them completely. Eleanor walked straight up to me. Her hands, covered in expensive diamonds, were slightly trembling as she grabbed a pristine white cloth napkin from the nearest table. Without saying a single word, this incredibly powerful, intimidating woman began personally dabbing the wine off my dress. Patricia gasped out loud. Do not help the maid. Eleanor glared back coldly. Shut your mouth. Julian then arrogantly threw the massive engagement dinner bill directly at my chest. Clean this expensive tab. I did not flinch. I slowly looked down at the leather folder resting on the hardwood floor, then shifted my gaze back to Julian. His arrogant smile was plastered across his face, fully expecting me to burst into tears or run out of the room in shame. Instead, I calmly bent down, picked up the bill, and opened it. $25,000. A drop in the bucket for me, but a massive fortune for my parents, who I knew were secretly drowning in massive debt to maintain their country club lifestyle. I opened my clutch and pulled out a sleek, heavy black centurion card. The solid metal gleamed under the bright chandelier light. I did not even look at Julian as I held it out. A waiter who had been hovering nervously near the wall immediately rushed forward to take it from my hand. Put it all on this, I instructed, my voice completely smooth and entirely unwavering. And add a 30% tip for the inconvenience of this disruption. Julian threw his head back and laughed loudly, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed through the silent room. A black card, really, Zola? What client did you steal that from? Or did you buy a fake one online just to impress us? Do not embarrass yourself any further. The waiter is going to run that piece of plastic, and you are going to be escorted out by security. My mother, Patricia, gasped in pure horror, rushing forward to snatch the card back. Zola, stop this ridiculous charade right now! She hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward Eleanor, who was still standing, completely frozen, near my chair. You cannot possibly pay for this. You are going to humiliate us, even more than you already have. I smoothly stepped out of my mother's reach. I gave the waiter a sharp nod. He swallowed hard and practically sprinted toward the payment terminal. The room remained suspended in a suffocating tension. Bianca was clutching Julian's arm, glaring at me with pure venom. My father Marcus was shaking his head in disgust. But Eleanor had not moved a single inch. She was staring at the doorway where the waiter had disappeared, her breathing shallow and erratic. Less than 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. He was not accompanied by security. Instead, his posture had completely transformed. He approached me with his head bowed, holding the silver tray with trembling hands. He presented the heavy metal card and the printed receipt directly to me, completely ignoring Julian, who was standing right there, expecting a massive scene. Your card was approved immediately, ma'am, the waiter said, his voice dripping with profound respect. Thank you for your incredible generosity. If there is absolutely anything else you need tonight, please let me know. Julian's arrogant smile vanished instantly. His jaw went slack as he stared at the cleared receipt sitting on the silver tray. Bianca let out a confused, high-pitched squeak.
Approved! Marcus choked out, nearly dropping his glass of bourbon. What do you mean, approved? Run it again. There was obviously some kind of huge mistake.
There is no mistake, sir, the waiter replied firmly, stepping back to give me plenty of space. The entire table erupted. Julian began demanding to see the receipt, insisting it was some kind of elaborate fraud. Bianca started whining that I was trying to ruin her special night by showing off stolen money. My father was loudly questioning the restaurant staff, demanding an explanation for how a house cleaner could clear a $25,000 charge without batting an eye. Through all the chaotic shouting, Eleanor finally spoke. "Sit down, Julian," she snapped, her voice cracking slightly. "Stop making a total fool of yourself." Before Julian could respond to his mother's highly unusual reprimand, Patricia grabbed my arm with a grip so incredibly tight her manicured nails dug into my skin. Her face was flushed with absolute fury and sheer panic. She yanked me away from the table, dragging me forcibly through the heavy dining room doors and down the carpeted hallway directly toward the women's restroom. She shoved me inside the lavishly decorated bathroom and let the heavy wooden door slam shut behind us. The sudden quiet of the restroom was a stark contrast to the massive shouting match we had just left behind. "Did you steal that from a wealthy client?" Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with intense venom as she aggressively backed me against the cold marble sinks. "Tell me the truth right now, Zola. Ever since you dropped out of law school to scrub toilets, you have been deeply jealous of Bianca. You have always resented her massive success. You have always hated that she found a good, wealthy man, while you throw your entire life away. Are you trying to go to federal prison just to ruin her engagement dinner?" I calmly turned away from her frantic, sweating face. I turned on the gold faucet and began washing my hands, taking my time as the warm water ran over my fingers. I looked at her reflection in the large mirror above the sink. "You kicked me out of the house at 19, simply because I refused to join your precious sorority and play your fake high society games," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and completely cold. "You cut me off completely, told everyone I was a massive failure, and left me to completely fend for myself, so do not stand there and pretend you know anything about my life, my actual career, or exactly how I make my money." I dried my hands on a thick paper towel and tossed it into the brass bin. I turned to face her directly. "Do not worry about whose money is on that card, Mother. You should be worrying about why Eleanor was shaking." Before she could answer, Marcus kicked the restroom door open, his greedy eyes locked onto me. "You owe this family everything now." The heavy oak door of the restroom slammed shut behind my father, echoing loudly off the marble walls. Marcus stood blocking the only exit, his chest heaving under his tailored tuxedo. The mask of the polished, wealthy patriarch he wore so carefully in the dining room had completely vanished. In its place was a desperate, sweating man who looked like he was drowning. He did not look at me with the authority of a father. He looked at me with the ravenous hunger of a cornered predator who had just spotted a lifeline. "I saw that absurdly expensive receipt," Marcus growled, taking a slow, menacing step toward me. "I saw the limit on that card. Do not stand there and try to deny it, Zola. You are sitting on a massive pile of cash, and you are going to use it to save us right this second." I leaned back against the cool marble sink, crossing my arms over my ruined silk dress. "Save you from what, exactly, Marcus? I thought the family real estate empire was thriving. I thought Bianca was the crown jewel who was going to elevate our legacy. Why would a family as rich and powerful as ours need saving from a house cleaner?" My father's face turned an ugly shade of purple. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "Do not play these smart games with me. The commercial real estate market completely tanked, and our firm is bleeding cash faster than a severed artery. We are completely over-leveraged on the downtown Atlanta properties. We are drowning in debt, Zola. If Julian's wealthy white family finds out we are broke, they will call off this wedding in a heartbeat. Julian's father is a billionaire investor. He expects a partner, not a charity case. Patricia stepped out, her hands trembling as she grabbed my arm again. You have to help us, she pleaded, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. We have kept up appearances for the Jack and Jill Club. If word gets out that your father is bankrupt, we will be absolutely ruined in Buckhead society. We will be laughingstocks. I looked at my mother, feeling a profound sense of disgust. You care more about what a bunch of country club snobs think than you care about your own daughter. You literally just introduced me as a dirty maid barely 20 minutes ago, and now you want a massive bailout? Marcus violently slammed his fist against the counter. I demand that you transfer $2 million into my corporate holding account by tomorrow morning, he barked. It will cover the immediate loan defaults and secure the venue payments. We can keep the facade going until Bianca marries Julian, and then we will have access to his family's trust fund. A short, incredibly sharp laugh escaped my lips before I could even stop it. The sound bounced off the tiled walls. I laughed harder, shaking my head at the sheer audacity of his demand. You want me to commit wire fraud and drain my own liquidity so you can trap a racist, arrogant trust fund baby into a fake marriage? You must be out of your mind. You are just as selfish as the day you refused to give Bianca your college savings, Marcus roared, his voice echoing loudly. When you were 18, we told you to surrender your scholarship money so your sister could study in Paris. You refused to support your own blood. You will fund this wedding, or you are dead to us forever. I have been dead to you for 14 years, I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. I built my entire business empire with absolutely zero help from you. I ate instant noodles for 3 years while you bought Bianca a Mercedes. I am not giving you a single dime. The heavy restroom door suddenly swung wide open again. Bianca stood in the threshold, glaring at me with red, tear-filled eyes. She had clearly been listening from the hallway. You are a total monster, Zola, Bianca sobbed, stomping her designer heel loudly on the marble floor. You just want to see me fail, because no wealthy man will ever want you. You are trying to sabotage the most important day of my entire life. Marcus straightened his jacket, his breathing slowing down as a cruel, vindictive smile spread across his face. He looked at Patricia, then at Bianca, and finally back at me. He was playing what he believed was his ultimate trump card. If that is your final answer, then prepare to lose everything, Marcus announced, his voice booming with artificial confidence. I am altering my will and executing a deed transfer. The prime commercial lot in downtown Atlanta is being gifted directly to Julian and Bianca as a wedding dowry tomorrow morning. It is a multi-million-dollar property. Julian's family will be thrilled, and it will guarantee the marriage goes through. Patricia clapped her hands together, a wicked smile replacing her panic. That is a brilliant move, Marcus. That property is worth an absolute fortune. Julian will have no idea about the temporary cash flow issues once he holds the deed to that prime real estate. Marcus stared at me, expecting to see complete defeat in my eyes. You are officially disinherited, Zola, he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. You will not get a single square inch of the family legacy. You can keep your little black card, but you will never be part of our real estate empire. You are completely cut off. I stood there for a long moment. I did not cry. I did not scream or beg for his forgiveness. I slowly reached up and adjusted my diamond earrings, letting the heavy silence stretch out until the tension in the room became truly unbearable. I looked at my father with dead, emotionless eyes. You cannot give away what you do not own, Marcus. I did not wait to see Marcus's face fully register my words. I simply turned on my heel, pushed past my stunned father, and walked out of the lavish restroom. I glided through the dining room without sparing a single glance at the ruined engagement party. I walked out the front doors of the Buckhead Club, the cool night air hitting my damp silk dress, and stepped directly into the back of my waiting, blacked-out Maybach. My driver Thomas caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, Miss Williams?" "Everything is perfectly fine, Thomas," I replied, leaning my head against the plush leather headrest. "Take me home." Home was not a rented apartment or a modest house in the suburbs. Home was a $30 million three-story penthouse occupying the absolute pinnacle of the highest residential tower in Atlanta. As the private elevator opened directly into my foyer, the floor-to-ceiling glass windows revealed a sprawling, glittering view of the entire city skyline, the exact same city my parents desperately pretended they owned. I poured myself a glass of aged Macallan, staring down at the city lights. My parents' words from the restroom echoed in my mind. "We have given up on you. You are officially disinherited." They truly believed their multi-million-dollar real estate firm was the ultimate prize. They had absolutely no idea that while I was allegedly scrubbing toilets, I was actually scrubbing the dirty financial records of billionaires, cleaning up corporate scandals, and managing offshore asset portfolios for the most powerful families in the country. I built Z Elite Concierge from nothing but a laptop and a relentless, terrifying ambition to never depend on anyone again. Now my net worth eclipsed Marcus's entire ancestral legacy by a factor of 50. The weekend passed in absolute, luxurious silence. I did not receive a single text or call from my family, which meant they were actively playing the victim, convincing themselves that my Black Centurion card was stolen or fake. It was a pathetic coping mechanism. By 8 o'clock Monday morning, I was stepping off my private elevator into the corporate headquarters of Z Elite Concierge. The entire top floor of the prestigious glass skyscraper belonged to my firm. The aesthetic was ruthlessly modern white marble floors, frosted glass walls, and a multi-million-dollar art collection. Dozens of highly paid analysts, wealth managers, and corporate lawyers were already buzzing around the trading floors, moving millions of dollars across international borders with a single keystroke. Kira, my brilliant executive assistant, was walking perfectly in step with me the second I crossed the threshold. She was holding a thick leather-bound dossier. "Good morning, Zola," Kira said smoothly, handing me my espresso. The Asian markets closed exactly where we projected. However, there is a highly urgent matter regarding the downtown commercial lot acquisition. Vance is waiting in your office. I pushed open the heavy glass doors to my corner office. Vance, my ruthless lead corporate attorney, was sitting on the white leather sofa, surrounded by a mountain of financial ledgers and bank statements. "Tell me the trap is ready to spring, Vance," I said, taking my seat behind the massive custom-cut mahogany desk. Vance smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He stood up and slid a thick stack of heavily redacted documents across my desk. "Your father is not just drowning Zola. He is already at the bottom of the ocean. Marcus's commercial real estate firm is operating on fumes. He has been taking out high-interest loans against the downtown commercial lot, the exact lot he thinks he is gifting to Julian, just to cover the massive overhead of your mother's country club lifestyle." I slowly flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the staggering numbers. Marcus was hemorrhaging cash. He had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments on the downtown property. The bank had quietly initiated foreclosure proceedings 30 days ago. "Marcus thinks he is untouchable because he plays golf with the regional bank executives," Vance continued, pointing to a specific highlighted clause. "He genuinely believes they will give him an indefinite grace period. He has no idea that the bank bundled his defaulted debt into a distressed asset portfolio and quietly put it up for private auction last week." "And?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "And," Kira chimed in, tapping a few buttons on her tablet, causing the massive digital screen on my office wall to display a legally binding transfer deed. "Through a heavily shielded proxy LLC, Z Elite Concierge purchased his debt in full at 3 o'clock this morning. We did not just buy the loan, Zola. We bought the entire deed. Marcus is no longer the owner of the downtown commercial lot. You are.
I stared at my own digital signature stamped at the bottom of the multi-million-dollar acquisition. My father had stood in that bathroom on Friday night, puffing out his chest, threatening to completely cut me out of his real estate empire. He had threatened to hand his crown jewel to a racist, arrogant trust fund boy, just to secure his own social climbing. "Does Marcus know?" I asked, leaning back in my executive chair. "Not yet," Vance replied, closing his briefcase. "The banking system will officially process the transfer by the end of the week. Right now, Marcus is blissfully unaware that he is sitting in an office building that he no longer owns. He is actively planning to hand Julian a completely worthless piece of paper as a wedding dowry." I took a slow sip of my espresso, savoring the bitter, complex taste. The sheer irony of the situation was almost poetic. Julian was marrying my terrible sister exclusively to get his hands on that specific property. Marcus was forcing the marriage exclusively to gain access to Julian's supposed billions. It was a beautiful, toxic ecosystem of mutual parasites, and I had just quietly removed their only host. "Let him keep dreaming," I instructed Vance. "I want Marcus to continue pulling from the revolving credit line tied to that property for a few more days. Let him rack up the catering bills for Bianca's wedding. Let him buy Patricia more diamonds to show off to her fake friends. The higher they climb, the harder the concrete is going to feel when I finally pull the rug out from under them." Vance nodded sharply. "Understood. But be careful, Zola. Desperate people do completely unhinged things when their backs are against the wall. Patricia is already spinning a narrative that you are a criminal." "Let her do." I smiled coldly, closing the leather dossier. A lion does not lose sleep over the opinions of a panicked sheep. Meanwhile, just 3 miles away, in a dusty, outdated office building, Marcus was already feeling the very first subtle tremors of the earthquake I had just set in motion. Marcus was sitting at his cluttered desk, aggressively wiping a heavy layer of sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. The air conditioning in his building was broken, and he lacked the corporate funds to call a repairman. His office phone had been ringing incessantly all morning. Creditors, caterers, venue managers demanding immediate deposits for Bianca's lavish wedding reception. Marcus angrily picked up the receiver, barking into the phone. "I told you the check is in the mail! Do you know who I am? I am Marcus Williams. My daughter is marrying Julian Thornton this weekend. His family practically owns the entire eastern seaboard." He slammed the phone down his chest, heaving with severe anxiety. He opened his top desk drawer and stared at the thick, fraudulent deed to the downtown commercial lot. He had painstakingly drafted the documents himself, praying that Julian would not hire an independent auditor to verify the property's financial status before the wedding. "Just make it to Saturday," Marcus whispered frantically to himself, his hands trembling as he locked the drawer. "Just get the ring on Bianca's finger, get access to the Thornton Trust Fund, and everything will be perfectly fine." He had absolutely no idea that the Thornton Trust Fund was completely empty, completely drained by Julian's criminal embezzlement, and he had no idea that the woman he had just publicly disowned was currently holding the detonator to his entire existence. The calm before the storm was officially over. The engagement dinner disaster was only the beginning. By the time I sat at my sleek mahogany desk in my penthouse office the following week, my mother had already launched her vicious counterattack. Patricia was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. She was a woman who burned bridges and salted the earth to protect her fragile social standing. My assistant, Kira, walked into my office with a deeply concerned expression, holding a tablet tightly against her chest. She informed me that Patricia was currently hosting a lavish luncheon for her highly exclusive country club friends. My mother had explicitly banned me from the property, making sure every wealthy socialite in Atlanta knew I was entirely unwelcome.
But being excluded from a pretentious luncheon was not the real issue. The problem was what Patricia was telling her powerful guests. Kira transferred an incoming call to my private line.
It was Richard Sterling, one of my most prominent clients. Richard was a billionaire real estate mogul, and I personally managed his $100 million asset portfolio. He did not sound happy when I answered the phone.
Zola, I just received a completely unhinged phone call from your mother, Richard said, his voice laced with absolute disbelief. She tracked down my private number through a country club directory. Patricia explicitly warned me that you are a dangerous thief.
She claimed you stole money from your own father to fund a fake cleaning business and told me to terminate my contracts with you immediately. I felt a sharp spike of anger radiating through my chest. My mother was actively trying to destroy my livelihood. She was using her high society network to completely annihilate my reputation, completely unaware of the massive empire I actually controlled. I took a deep breath to steady my voice. Richard, sincerely apologize for her highly unprofessional behavior. My family is currently dealing with some severe financial distress, and my mother is lashing out irrationally. Richard let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed through the phone speaker. Do not apologize to me, Zola. I actually found it incredibly amusing. Your mother thinks you run a tiny janitorial service. She has absolutely no idea that your firm just secured me a $20 million tax break last quarter. I told her she was completely out of her mind and hung up the phone. But you need to put a leash on her before she calls someone who does not know you as well as I do. I thanked Richard for his unwavering loyalty and ended the call. My hands curled into tight fists, resting on my mahogany desk. Patricia wanted to play a dirty game of social sabotage. She wanted to humiliate me and ruin my business out of pure spite. It was time to show my parents exactly what happens when they cross a woman who holds all the financial cards. I pressed the intercom button on my desk and summoned Kira back into my office. Pull up the financial files for my father's commercial real estate firm, I commanded, pulling out my secure laptop. Marcus has been illegally pulling cash from a revolving credit line tied directly to the downtown commercial lot. He thinks he still owns that prime property. He has no idea that my corporation bought his defaulted debt from the bank 3 months ago. Kira quickly pulled up the banking ledgers. The numbers were absolutely staggering. Marcus was bleeding cash at an alarming rate, using the business credit line to fund Patricia's lavish country club luncheons, Bianca's expensive wedding preparations, and Julian's extravagant engagement demands. My father had always used money as a weapon of ultimate control. When I was in college, he cut off my tuition payments entirely just because I missed a single family dinner to study for final exams. He forced me to take out massive loans while he bought Bianca a brand new luxury car for getting a minor promotion. He weaponized his wealth to keep everyone trapped under his thumb. Now I was the one holding the weapon. Call our corporate legal team and contact the bank executives, I instructed Kira, my voice cold and incredibly precise. I want that credit line legally frozen right this second. Shut off every single card tied to that account. Do not leave them a single active penny. Kira nodded sharply and immediately executed the orders. Within exactly 2 hours, the financial squeeze took full effect. Kira walked back into my office with a highly satisfied smile on her face. The accounts are completely frozen, Zola, and we are already getting automated alerts from the banking monitors. Marcus just had his premium credit card declined at an expensive steakhouse in Buckhead. He tried 2 other cards and they were both rejected for insufficient funds. I smiled, leaning back in my leather executive chair. The timing was absolutely perfect. Patricia was currently hosting her elite luncheon completely dependent on those exact same frozen accounts to pay the massive catering bill. Her attempt to publicly destroy my reputation was about to backfire in the most humiliating way possible. She wanted to warn the world that I was a thief.
but she was the one sitting at a country club with completely empty pockets. Before I could even savor the victory, a massive commotion erupted outside my heavy glass office doors. Muffled shouting echoed down the corridor, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. Kira jumped slightly, her eyes widening, as she immediately turned her head toward the loud, disruptive noise echoing from the front reception desk. The tall, heavy wooden doors to my own private executive suite suddenly burst wide open with extreme physical violence. Bianca violently stormed into my sprawling corporate headquarters, her face twisted into a nasty mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She clearly thought she was walking into a cheap, dirty janitorial supply office, completely ready to cause a massive, highly destructive scene right here, today. Bianca stood in the center of the reception area, her chest heaving with indignation. She ignored the minimalist, multi-million-dollar aesthetic of my corporate headquarters. In her mind, she had just kicked down the doors of a janitorial closet. She pointed a manicured finger at my receptionist, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Where is she? Where is my pathetic excuse for a sister? Tell Zola to get her dirty hands off my wedding registry right this second." My assistant Kira stepped forward to intervene, but Bianca aggressively shoved past her. She marched deeper into the reception lounge, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished stone. "You cannot hide from me, Zola," Bianca shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I know you are the one responsible for this disaster. My entire wedding registry has been frozen, and the luxury boutique just called to tell me the credit card associated with my account has been declined. You somehow manipulated the bank because you are truly jealous of my happiness." I remained inside my executive suite, watching the display through the soundproof glass walls of my office. Bianca was unraveling. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a crumpled, legal-looking document, waving it in the air. "I brought a legal waiver, and you are going to sign it today," she hollered. "You are going to officially surrender any future rights to our family name. You are a disgusting, embarrassing maid, and I will not let you taint my perfect marriage to Julian with your poverty. You are a complete liability to my high society image." When I did not run out to cower before her, Bianca's temper escalated into physical violence. She stomped over to a pedestal, displaying a crystal sculpture. "Do you hear me, you worthless cleaner?" Bianca screamed wildly, gesturing with the legal waiver. Her arms swung out, intentionally striking the fragile art piece. The heavy crystal toppled off its display and shattered against the marble floor, sending thousands of shards flying across the lobby. The loud crash finally made me move. I smoothly stood up from my executive chair and pushed open the heavy glass door of my office. I did not run, and I certainly did not yell. I walked out into the lobby with the calm, terrifying authority of a woman who owned every single brick in the entire building. "You have absolutely no idea where you are standing, do you, Bianca?" I asked my voice, carrying a lethal, quiet dominance that immediately silenced the murmuring staff. Bianca whipped around to face me, her chest puffing out with artificial superiority. "I am standing in your little cleaning office, and I am demanding that you take responsibility for ruining my bridal registry." I looked down at the shattered crystal sculpture scattered across the floor, then slowly brought my gaze back up to meet her furious, entitled eyes. "You are standing in the corporate headquarters of Z Elite Concierge, a company that manages the wealth of billionaires, and you just destroyed a custom, valuable art installation." Bianca let out a shrill, mocking laugh. "Stop lying to make yourself look important. You scrub toilets. Now sign this waiver and give up your legal right to the family legacy, or I will have Julian's parents shut down this pathetic little business by tomorrow morning." I did not waste another breath trying to explain reality to a woman actively drowning in her own delusions. I simply raised my right hand and gave a sharp, subtle nod to the head of my elite security team. 4 heavily built men in tailored black suits immediately stepped out from the shadows of the corridor. They moved with terrifying efficiency, closing in on Bianca, before she could even register their presence. One guard firmly grabbed her left arm, while another guard secured her right. "Get your filthy hands off me!" Bianca shrieked, kicking her heels wildly as they effortlessly lifted her off the marble floor. "I am a high society bride. My fiancé will destroy all of you, Zola. Tell them to let me go right now." I casually crossed my arms and watched them drag her forcefully toward the exit. "Escort the intruder out of the building," I instructed the security team calmly. "If she steps foot on this property again, have her arrested for criminal trespassing." Bianca's obscenities echoed through the lobby until the heavy glass doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her tantrum. I turned to Kira, who was staring at the shattered crystal on the floor. "Draft an invoice for exactly $15,000 to cover the property damage," I commanded. "Send the bill directly to Marcus's primary residential address. Let us see how my bankrupt father handles his golden child's temper tantrum now." I walked back into my office and closed the door, enjoying the sudden, peaceful silence. The contrast between my family's chaotic desperation and my carefully constructed empire was satisfying. Patricia thought she could ruin my reputation, and Marcus thought he could manipulate my finances. Instead, their entire world was crumbling around them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. I sat back down in my chair, preparing to review my next acquisition, fully aware that the financial trap I had set was now snapping shut. While I sat peacefully in my soundproof executive suite, watching the digital numbers on my financial monitors climb effortlessly higher, a completely different reality was violently crashing down on the people who had crossed me. The financial guillotine I had triggered was not just a metaphorical concept. It was a tangible, suffocating weight, and it was currently crushing Julian Thornton's throat. 10 miles away from my corporate headquarters, Julian was sitting inside his silver Aston Martin, parked in the darkest corner of an underground parking garage in downtown Atlanta. The engine was completely off. The air conditioning was dead. The interior of the luxury vehicle was stiflingly hot, but Julian was violently shivering. His custom linen suit was completely soaked in cold, terrified sweat. He stared at the glowing screen of his cell phone. He had 14 missed calls from an encrypted, untraceable number. Julian Thornton was a man who had spent his entire 32 years on Earth coasting on the unearned privilege of his aristocratic last name. He was arrogant, deeply entitled, and entirely convinced that rules did not apply to him. But the people who ran Vanguard Citadel did not care about his country club memberships or his prestigious bloodline. They only cared about the $5 million he had brazenly embezzled from their private equity reserves. Suddenly, the heavy passenger door of his Aston Martin was violently yanked open. Julian screamed, pressing himself hard against the driver's side door. A massively built man wearing a cheap black suit and leather gloves slid seamlessly into the passenger seat, closing the door behind him. The man smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and metallic iron. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. "You are ignoring our phone calls, Julian," the man said, his voice a low, terrifying gravel that vibrated against the leather interior. "Mr. Vance, at Vanguard Citadel, does not like being ignored. It makes him feel like you are not taking your $5 million debt seriously." "I am," Julian choked out his vocal cords, paralyzed with sheer, unadulterated terror. "I am taking it seriously. I have the money. I just need a few more days to liquidate an asset." The enforcer slowly reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick silver utility knife, and casually tapped the heavy metal handle against Julian's pristine dashboard. The sharp clicking sound echoed in the claustrophobic car. "An asset?" the man mocked quietly. "Your family trust fund is completely empty, Julian. We already checked. Your mother is secretly mortgaging her estate just to pay the landscaping staff. You do not have any assets. You have exactly until Friday evening. $5 million wired directly into the offshore account we provided. If the money is not there by sunset, we are not going to call you again. We are simply going to find you break both of your kneecaps with a steel pipe, and then hand the internal audit files directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Have a lovely wedding weekend, Mr. Thornton. The man opened the door, stepped out into the dim garage, and vanished into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Julian leaned over the steering wheel, gasping for air as if he had been drowning underwater. His heart was hammering against his ribcage with enough force to crack bone. He reached into his leather briefcase with trembling, frantic hands and pulled out the crisp white property deed Marcus had given him just yesterday. The downtown commercial lot.
It was his only lifeline. Julian had secretly contacted a ruthless real estate developer who specialized in buying distressed properties for cash. The developer had agreed to wire Julian exactly $6 million by Thursday afternoon, but only on one strict condition. The commercial lot had to be completely empty and devoid of all current tenants before the transaction could close. Julian stared at the deed, his panicked breathing fogging up the steering wheel. Marcus had told him that the only tenant on the property was a tiny, pathetic janitorial supply company run by Zola. "I just have to evict the maid," Julian muttered to himself, his arrogance desperately trying to override his blinding fear. "I just have to kick Zola out onto the street. Today. Bulldoze her miserable little cleaning closet, and the money is mine. She is weak. She is nothing. I will break her." He wiped the sweat from his forehead, completely unaware that the deed in his hands was a worthless, defaulted piece of trash, and the maid he was planning to evict was actually the billionaire who held his entire existence in the palm of her hand. While Julian was actively plotting his own spectacular demise in a dark parking garage, Patricia was fighting a completely different but equally humiliating battle under the bright crystal chandeliers of the Piedmont Country Club. My mother was hosting a lavish, highly exclusive luncheon for 12 of the most influential socialites in Buckhead. They were seated at a prime table on the veranda, sipping expensive imported mimosas and picking at plates of beluga caviar. Patricia was in her element, wearing a massive diamond necklace and spinning a carefully crafted web of lies to protect her fragile ego. "It is truly tragic." Patricia sighed dramatically, waving a manicured hand as she gossiped about me to her elite friends, Margaret and Cynthia. "Zola has always been deeply unstable. We gave her absolutely everything, but she chose to live in the gutter. Now she runs a filthy little house-cleaning business and tries to steal money from our wealthy friends out of pure, unhinged jealousy. Marcus and I have simply washed our hands of her." Margaret nodded sympathetically, adjusting her pastel sun hat. "You are so strong, Patricia. To deal with a delinquent child while planning Bianca's royal wedding? Speaking of which, the floral arrangements you ordered from Paris must have cost an absolute fortune." "Oh, money is simply not an object when it comes to my golden child," Patricia laughed, a shrill, arrogant sound that carried across the terrace. Just as she took another sip of her mimosa, the head waiter, a stern, older man named Pierre, approached the table. He did not offer his usual obsequious bow. Instead, he leaned down and whispered discreetly into my mother's ear. "Madam, there seems to be a minor issue with the billing. The club manager urgently requests your presence in his private office." Patricia's fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, masking her sudden anxiety with a practiced wave of annoyance. "Excuse me for a moment, ladies. The staff here is so incompetent with corporate accounts. I will be right back." She stood up and walked briskly through the dining room, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished wood floors. When she pushed open the door to the manager's office, her arrogant demeanor was fully locked in place. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Patricia demanded, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "You are embarrassing me in front of the most powerful women in this city." Mr. Sterling,
The club manager sat behind his desk with his hands folded. He did not look intimidated. He slowly turned his computer monitor around so Patricia could clearly see the bright red flashing letters on the screen. Declined. Insufficient funds. Account frozen.
"We have run your primary platinum card 4 times, Patricia," Mr. Sterling said coldly, dropping the polite pretense. "It has been rejected by your bank for severe delinquency. We also attempted to run the 2 backup corporate cards you keep on file. They have both been completely frozen due to an active property foreclosure linked to your husband's holding company." All the blood violently drained from Patricia's face. The room suddenly began to spin. "Foreclosure frozen, that is absolutely impossible. We are multimillionaires. Run the card again. There is a glitch in your cheap, outdated machine." "It is not a glitch," the manager replied, his voice hardening. "I personally called your bank's VIP liaison. They informed me that your credit lines have been permanently shut off. You currently owe this country club $4,000 for today's luncheon alone. If you cannot provide a valid wire transfer or cash within the next 10 minutes, I am going to have to walk out onto that terrace, ask your wealthy friends to cover the bill, and publicly suspend your elite membership." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if she had just been shot. The thought of Margaret and Cynthia finding out she was completely broke was a fate worse than physical death. It would be the ultimate, permanent social ruin. No, please wait," Patricia panicked, her voice dropping into a pathetic, desperate whisper. She frantically unclasped the heavy vintage Rolex watch from her wrist, a prized anniversary gift from Marcus, and slammed it onto the manager's desk. "Keep this. It is worth $30,000. Keep it as collateral until Marcus fixes this stupid banking error tomorrow. Just do not tell my guests." Mr. Sterling looked down at the luxury watch with total disgust, fully realizing that the rumors of the Williams family's financial collapse were entirely true. He slowly slid the Rolex into his desk drawer. "You have exactly 24 hours to clear your balance, Patricia. Now return to your table." Patricia walked out of the office feeling like she was walking to her own execution. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clench them into tight fists at her sides. She plastered the terrifying, painful fake smile back onto her face as she returned to the veranda, sitting down among the billionaires while secretly drowning in massive, unpayable debt. She knew, deep in her dark, vindictive heart, that Zola was somehow responsible for this nightmare. Back in my penthouse office, I was leaning back in my executive chair, watching the real-time banking alerts pop up on my secure digital monitors. Alert: corporate card ending in 4452 declined at Piedmont Country Club. Alert: secondary line of credit frozen. I took a slow, highly satisfied sip of my sparkling water. The financial trap had completely snapped shut. My parents were completely bankrupt, Bianca's fake high society image was unraveling, and Julian was currently backed into a lethal corner by ruthless criminals. The chessboard was set exactly how I wanted it, but the peaceful silence in my office only lasted for a few seconds. My personal cell phone began ringing loudly on my mahogany desk. The caller identification displayed Julian's name. I answered the call, putting the phone to my ear, waiting to hear what the desperate, arrogant groom finally had to say. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic excuse for a sister." Julian barked into the phone, his voice dripping with arrogance and fury. "I just saw the property paperwork Marcus gave us for the wedding dowry. I am officially the new owner of the downtown commercial lot. That means I am officially your new landlord. I am tripling the rent on your little cleaning closet. Get out, now!" I held the phone to my ear, listening to the sheer arrogance radiating from Julian's voice. He truly believed he had just delivered a devastating blow. I did not interrupt him. I let him revel in his fabricated power, knowing every single word he spoke was actively digging his own grave. "Did you hear me, Zola?"
Julian sneered, his tone dripping with the kind of entitlement that only comes from generations of unearned privilege. Your father just handed over the deed to the downtown commercial lot as Bianca's wedding dowry. I saw the paperwork with my own 2 eyes. That prime real estate is now fully under my control, which means your pathetic little janitorial supply office sits on my property. You have exactly 24 hours to pack up your mops and buckets before I send my people to throw your trash onto the street. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the flawless panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline from my penthouse suite. The very property he was threatening to evict me from was currently owned free and clear by my corporation. Marcus had handed Julian a completely worthless defaulted deed. It was a fake dowry for a fake billionaire. "Julian, please be reasonable," I said, injecting panic into my voice to make it sound convincing. "You cannot evict my business on such short notice. I have employees who rely on me." "Your employees are not my problem," Julian laughed cruelly. "To be honest, Zola, your entire family is nothing but a stepping stone for me. Bianca is a convenient accessory for my public image, and Marcus was dumb enough to hand over his best asset just to associate with my name. You people are so desperate for validation that you are handing me the keys to your empire. But you are a stain on the property, a lower-class maid pretending to be a business owner. You do not belong in my buildings." His vile microaggressions were disgusting, but incredibly revealing. Julian was not a wealthy aristocrat looking for marriage. He was a ruthless opportunist, actively trying to exploit my parents' need for social validation. He was planning to bleed the family dry and use the commercial lot to save his own sinking ship. I kept my voice small, playing the role of the terrified victim he desperately wanted me to be. "Please, Julian, I am begging you, do not do this to me. There must be some way we can work this out. Let me speak to you in person. I can pay the increased rent if you just give me time." "Time is money, Zola, and you do not have either," Julian mocked, intoxicated by his own dominance. "But I will tell you what, I am feeling generous today. Bianca's lavish bridal shower is happening this afternoon at the Piedmont Country Club. If you want to keep your miserable little cleaning closet, you can show up, swallow your pride, and publicly beg me for an extension in front of everyone. Maybe if you apologize to my mother for existing, I will let you scrub the floors instead of kicking you out." "The bridal shower," I stammered, raising the pitch of my voice to sound completely panicked. "But Patricia expressly banned me from the country club. Security will not even let me through the front gates." "Figure it out, maid," Julian snapped. "You have exactly 3 hours to get to the club and beg for your professional life. If you do not show up, I am calling the sheriff to lock your doors tonight." The line went dead. The dial tone echoed softly in my quiet, soundproof office. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear and placed it flat on my mahogany desk. The feigned panic vanished from my face, replaced by a razor-sharp, completely lethal smile. Julian had just handed me the perfect stage for his own spectacular execution. He wanted me to show up and beg for my livelihood. He had absolutely no idea that I owned the entire hospitality group managing the Piedmont Country Club. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Kira, get the senior legal team in my office right this second, and tell the head of security to prep my transport vehicle." Less than a minute later, 3 of my top corporate attorneys walked into my office, carrying sleek briefcases and waiting for my exact command. Kira stood right beside them, holding her digital tablet tightly. "Julian Thornton just claimed ownership of the downtown commercial lot based on Marcus's fraudulent dowry paperwork," I informed my legal team, my voice echoing with absolute unwavering authority. "He believes he is my new landlord and intends to evict my company by tomorrow morning." My lead attorney, a brilliant, ruthless man named Vance, actually laughed out loud. He is trying to evict the owner of the property using a defaulted deed. That is practically begging for a massive fraud lawsuit. Should we contact the local authorities to have him arrested for extortion? Not yet, I replied smoothly, standing up and smoothing the skirt of my navy silk dress. I prefer to handle my pest control personally. Julian wants a public spectacle, and I'm going to give him one that he will never, ever forget. I looked directly at Vance, my eyes narrowing with pure vengeance. Prepare the official eviction notices for Marcus's remaining firm offices. We serve them tonight at the bridal shower. Make sure every page has the certified bank seal stamped on it. I want no room for denial. Kira smiled sharply, typing the urgent commands into her digital tablet with lightning speed. The trap was now fully set. Julian thought he was a powerful predator, hunting a weak, defenseless target. He was about to find out that he had just walked blindly into a lion's den. I grabbed my designer handbag and walked toward the glass doors. It was time to crash a party. The drive to the Piedmont Country Club took exactly 20 minutes. My heavily armored vehicle glided past the towering iron gates and pulled smoothly into the circular driveway. The valet immediately rushed forward to open my door. I stepped out into the warm Atlanta air, wearing a tailored white pantsuit that screamed quiet, untouchable wealth. I handed the valet my keys and walked straight up the wide marble steps toward the main terrace. Bianca's lavish bridal shower was in full swing. The outdoor veranda was dripping in expensive pink floral arrangements, crystal champagne towers, and dozens of high society women wearing large pastel hats. I could hear the obnoxious fake laughter of my mother echoing across the manicured lawn. I did not hesitate. I walked right past the welcome sign and stepped directly onto the crowded terrace. Patricia spotted me almost instantly. The fake, joyful smile completely vanished from her heavily powdered face. She dropped her champagne flute on a nearby table and marched aggressively toward me, her eyes wide with sheer panic and pure fury. "What on earth are you doing here?" Patricia hissed, stepping directly into my path to block me from the other wealthy guests. "I specifically banned you from this property. You are a disgusting embarrassment, and you are not going to ruin your sister's special day. Turn around and get out right now before I call security and have you physically thrown out onto the street." I did not back down. I just smiled at her, completely unfazed by her pathetic attempt at intimidation. "I am not going anywhere, Patricia," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly calm and even. "I am exactly where I need to be." My mother's face turned an ugly shade of dark red. She frantically spun around and waved her hand wildly at the nearest security guard. "You there! Grab the general manager right this second. We have an unauthorized intruder who is harassing my guests. I want her removed by force immediately." Within seconds, the heavy glass doors to the main clubhouse opened. Mr. Hayes, the stern, impeccably dressed general manager of the country club, walked briskly out onto the terrace, flanked by two large security guards. Patricia crossed her arms over her chest, a triumphant, wicked smirk spreading across her face. She truly believed she had just won. "Mr. Hayes, thank goodness you are here," Patricia practically yelled, making sure the surrounding guests could hear her authoritative tone. "This woman is my estranged daughter. She is a low-class house cleaner who is severely mentally unstable. She has trespassed on private property, and I demand that your men drag her out of here immediately." Mr. Hayes did not even look at Patricia. He walked right past her outstretched arm, completely ignoring her shrill, demanding voice. He stepped directly in front of me, clasped his hands together, and gave a deep, highly respectful bow. "Welcome back to the club, Madam CEO," Mr. Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent terrace. "It is an absolute honor to have you here today. Is the catering and service meeting your exceptionally high standards?" Patricia physically stumbled backward, as if she had just been slapped across the face. Her jaw dropped open. Bianca, who had rushed over to see the commotion, froze completely in her tracks. "What are you talking about?" Patricia choked out, her voice trembling with absolute shock. "Mr. Hayes, have you lost your mind? She is a maid. She scrubs toilets for a living." Mr. Hayes finally turned to look at my mother, his expression laced with complete and utter disgust. "Madam, you are speaking to the sole owner of the Sterling Hospitality Group. She personally owns this entire country club, the golf course, and the very ground you are currently standing on. If she wishes, she can have you banned from this property for the rest of your life." Patricia let out a high-pitched gasp. She clutched her chest, struggling to breathe as the reality of my true power finally crashed down on her. The wealthy socialites standing nearby began whispering frantically, their eyes darting between my furious mother and my calm, commanding presence. Before Patricia could even attempt to recover from the brutal public humiliation, Julian pushed his way through the crowd of women. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand and a profoundly arrogant scowl on his face. He clearly had not heard Mr. Hayes's massive revelation. He only saw me standing there and immediately assumed he held all the power. "Well, well, well, look who finally decided to show up," Julian mocked, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "I told you to come here and beg for your professional life, Zola. I did not expect you to actually have the guts to show your face around civilized people." Julian took a slow sip of his whiskey, looking me up and down with absolute contempt. He raised his voice so the entire party could hear his cruelty. "Since your bankrupt father officially transferred the deed of the downtown commercial lot to me this morning, I am your new landlord," Julian announced, puffing out his chest with unearned pride. "I am giving you one last chance, you worthless maid. Hand over the keys to your dirty little janitor closet right now, or I will call the police and have you arrested for squatting on my prime real estate." I did not flinch. I did not yell. I simply reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legally binding documents. The crisp white paper was stamped with bright red bank seals. I slammed the entire stack directly against Julian's chest. He fumbled and grabbed the heavy papers before they hit the ground. "You do not own the lot, Julian," I said, my voice echoing like a deadly sentence. "My company does. And your future father-in-law is a completely bankrupt man who lied to you about absolutely everything." Julian stared at me, his eyes darting from my face to the heavy stack of legal documents pressed firmly against his chest. For a fleeting second, the absolute certainty in my voice seemed to register, but his massive ego quickly overrode his logic. He let out a harsh, dismissive scoff and shoved the papers back toward me with aggressive force. "You are completely out of your mind," Julian sneered, shaking his head side to side. "Marcus showed me the deed himself just yesterday. You really expect me to believe that a lowly maid managed to buy a multi-million-dollar commercial lot right out from under him? Get out of here before I have you arrested for forgery and trespassing." I did not take the papers back. I simply let them fall from his hands. The thick stack hit the polished stone floor with a loud, satisfying smack. I stepped smoothly around Julian, completely ignoring his aggressive posture, and walked directly toward the extravagant gift table set up near the center of the terrace. A towering crystal vase, filled with imported pink roses, sat perfectly in the middle, surrounded by boxes wrapped in expensive silver paper. I picked up the heavy legal binder I'd brought with me, the one containing the original notarized foreclosure documents. I raised it high above my head and slammed it down onto the center of the gift table. The impact rattled the crystal vase, causing several rose petals to flutter down onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sharp sound drew the attention of every single guest who was not already staring at us. "Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once," I announced, raising my voice so it carried across the entire silent terrace.
Marcus did not transfer any property to you this morning. He could not transfer it because he defaulted on his commercial loans 3 entire months ago. The bank seized the downtown lot, and my corporation, Z Elite Concierge, purchased the debt in full. Marcus has been actively lying to you, to your mother, and to everyone in this room, just to secure this marriage. The collective gasp from the wealthy socialites sounded like a sudden vacuum pulling all the air out of the space. Whispers erupted instantly. Women leaned into each other, their eyes wide with morbid fascination.
"Shut your mouth right now!" Patricia shrieked, sprinting across the terrace with her arms flailing wildly.
She looked like a woman completely possessed by panic. She lunged toward the gift table, desperately trying to grab the binder and hide it from view.
"Do not listen to a single word she says. She is a jealous, vindictive liar. She forged these documents to ruin her sister's happiness out of pure spite."
Marcus hurried right behind her, his face sweating profusely under the warm afternoon sun. He pointed a trembling finger at me, trying to maintain his crumbling facade of patriarchal authority.
"This is absolute nonsense. I own that property free and clear. I have the original paperwork locked in my office safe. You are going to federal prison for creating these fake bank documents, Zola. Then call the police, Marcus,"
I challenged, crossing my arms over my white suit.
"Call the authorities right now and have them verify the bank seals on those foreclosure notices. Let us get the sheriff down here to confirm who actually owns the deed. Go ahead, make the call."
Marcus froze. His hand hovered over his pocket where his phone rested, but he did not make a single move to reach for it. The hesitation was all the proof anyone needed. The absolute terror in his eyes betrayed the lie he was trying so desperately to maintain. Julian pushed his way past my paralyzed father. He reached the gift table and aggressively ripped the binder away from Patricia's trembling hands. He flipped it up white pages. The arrogant, condescending smirk that had been permanently glued to his face all afternoon began to melt away. I watched his eyes track across the heavily redacted bank statements, the official foreclosure notices, and the undeniable, legally binding transfer of ownership to Z Elite Concierge. He saw the bright red raised bank seals. He saw the dates. He saw the staggering amount of debt Marcus had accumulated before the bank finally pulled the plug. The reality of the situation hit Julian like a physical blow to the chest. He was not marrying into a wealthy, powerful real estate family. He was marrying into a broke, heavily indebted family that was using him as a financial life raft. The prime real estate he thought he had just acquired to solve his own secret financial problems was completely gone. He had absolutely nothing to gain from this union anymore. His entire calculated plan was ruined. "Julian, honey, please do not look at those lies," Bianca pleaded, rushing to his side and grabbing his arm. Tears were streaming down her perfectly contoured face, leaving dark streaks of mascara on her cheeks. "She is just trying to destroy us. My father is incredibly wealthy. We are a prominent family. You know I love you so much." Julian did not look at her with love or reassurance. He slowly lowered the binder, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the heavy cardboard cover. His breathing became heavy and ragged. The charming, sophisticated groom persona completely vanished, replaced by a dark, volatile anger that radiated from his rigid posture. He looked down at Bianca with pure disgust. He ripped his arm out of Bianca's grasp with such violent force that she stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own expensive heels. The beautiful fairy tale romance dropped, instantly exposing the remarkably ugly, entirely transactional reality lurking underneath their relationship. Julian turned on Bianca, his face violently twisted with pure, unadulterated rage. He glared at the crying golden child, clenching his jaw tightly as the harsh truth settled in his mind. "You lied to me," Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifying register that made the guests physically step back.
You and your bankrupt parents lied to my face for several months.
Bianca reached out her hands, trembling as she tried to grasp his linen suit. Julian, please, listen to me. I did not know about this. I swear to you, I thought my father owned that property. We can fix this misunderstanding. We can figure it out.
Julian did not soften. He did not offer her a word of comfort.
Instead, he violently swatted her hands away with absolute disgust. The harsh force threw Bianca off balance, but she managed to stay on her feet, sobbing uncontrollably as her perfect image shattered.
Figure it out! Julian shouted, pacing like a caged animal before turning to face her. There is nothing left to figure out. Your entire family is a massive fraud. You are nothing but cheap social climbers. I needed that commercial lot to liquidate to save my family from ruin. The shocking confession ripped through the silent country club terrace. The wealthy women who had been whispering moments ago gasped out loud in sheer disbelief.
Julian ignored their shock,
his massive ego overriding any sense of decorum. He pointed an accusing finger at Marcus, who was standing paralyzed near the gift table. My family's trust fund has been drained for 3 years, Julian confessed loudly, the veins in his neck bulging. My father made terrible investments and we are drowning in massive debt. We are severely overleveraged. I only proposed to your useless daughter because you promised me that prime real estate. I thought I was marrying into a profitable empire to bail my family out. Bianca let out a devastated wail, clutching her chest as her beautiful fairy tale romance disintegrated. She was not marrying an aristocrat who loved her. She was marrying a broke man who only wanted to exploit her supposed grand inheritance. You completely used me, Bianca cried, taking a step toward him with tears streaming down her ruined makeup. You never actually loved me at all.
Love, Julian mocked fiercely, letting out a cruel laugh. You are an incredibly annoying, high-maintenance burden. The only thing attractive about you was your father's bank account. And now I find out that your older sister, the woman you all treat like garbage, is the only person with money? Bianca reached for him one last time, trying to salvage the broken illusion of her perfect life. Julian, please, stop saying these horrible things. Stop it right now. What happened next sent a massive shockwave of pure horror across the country club terrace. Julian raised his hand and forcefully slapped Bianca directly across the face. The sharp, cracking sound of his palm striking her cheek echoed like a gunshot. Bianca screamed in sudden agony and crumpled to the stone floor, sobbing hysterically. A collective shriek erupted from the assembled guests. Several women covered their mouths in terror, unable to process the brutal physical violence they had just witnessed. I stood perfectly still, my eyes narrowing with intense hatred at the abusive coward before me. I waited for Marcus to step up and defend his precious golden child. I waited for my father to lunge at the man who had just assaulted his favorite daughter. I waited for Patricia to scream in defense of the child she worshipped. Instead, my parents did the most cowardly thing I had ever witnessed. They ignored Julian's violent outburst and turned their furious, unhinged wrath directly onto me. "Look at what you have done!" Marcus roared, his face turning bright red with absolute fury as he pointed at me. You caused this mess, Zola. You drove him to this extreme reaction. You forged those bank documents just to ruin your sister's happiness out of jealous spite. I stared at my father in profound disbelief. He just struck your daughter across the face in front of a crowd, Marcus, and you are blaming me for exposing your financial lies? Patricia let out an animalistic scream. She did not run to comfort her weeping daughter on the floor. She locked her furious eyes on me and lost her mind. I will kill you, Patricia shrieked, sprinting across the terrace with her hands raised like sharp claws aiming directly for my face. She never even made it within 5 feet of me. My private security team, standing silently near the perimeter of the terrace, moved with terrifying speed.
Two heavily muscled men in dark suits stepped smoothly in front of my body, forming an impenetrable human wall. One guard firmly grabbed Patricia by her flailing arms, effortlessly neutralizing her attack. He quickly spun her around and locked her arms behind her back, holding her completely immobile and powerless.
Let me go right this instant! Patricia thrashed wildly against his iron grip, screaming loud obscenities as the security guard held her firmly in place. She ruined our prominent family. She ruined our reputation. She ruined everything. You ruined yourselves, I replied, my voice echoing with lethal, icy calm over my mother's screaming. I just handed you the mirror to see your own failures. Julian stepped backward, running a shaking hand through his styled blonde hair. He looked down at Bianca, who was still sobbing weakly on the floor, and then glared at Marcus with pure hatred. He straightened his expensive suit jacket completely, unapologetic and unbothered by the sudden violence he had just committed. This pathetic excuse for a wedding is officially off, Julian announced loudly, his voice dripping with pure venom and absolute arrogance. Unless you can miraculously wire exactly $5 million directly into my personal bank account by this coming Friday, I am walking away forever. And I am personally going to tell every single highly important person in our entire elite social circle that you are just a family of broke, desperate, lying frauds. Julian turned sharply on his heel and marched across the terrace, leaving absolute devastation in his wake. He did not look back at Bianca, who was still weeping on the cold stone floor. The heavy glass doors slammed shut behind him. The remaining guests began whispering, their eyes darting toward my parents with undisguised pity and disgust. Marcus stared blankly at the spot where his entire fake empire had just crumbled. Patricia, however, refused to accept defeat. She grabbed Bianca by the arm, hauling her up from the ground, and dragged her away from the staring crowd. I watched them retreat, completely ignoring me as they fled the scene of their own ruin. I simply signaled my security team and walked out to my waiting vehicle, my mind already calculating their next desperate move. Back at their heavily mortgaged estate in Buckhead, the reality of the situation finally hit Bianca. She did not pack her bags. She did not draft a restraining order against the man who just slapped her in public. Instead, she collapsed onto the living room sofa, hysterical, and begged her parents to find the $5 million. She sobbed about her ruined registry, her canceled honeymoon, and the intense social humiliation of being an abandoned bride. Bianca was willing to stay with an abusive man to preserve her flawless image. Marcus paced the room, rubbing his temples, knowing his credit lines were entirely frozen. Patricia paced right beside him, her fury boiling over into vengeance. Since they could not produce the money, Patricia decided to destroy the person she blamed for exposing their lies. Patricia immediately grabbed her phone and launched a vicious, calculated media campaign against me. She used her remaining social connections to contact the editor of a gossip blog known for destroying careers. Patricia paid them using a hidden cash reserve. Within 3 hours, a defamatory article went live on the internet. The article explicitly claimed that I was a dangerous con artist who had stolen my family's generational wealth to fund a fake corporate lifestyle. It alleged that I had illegally manipulated banking documents to steal Bianca's dowry out of sheer, unhinged jealousy. The post spread like wildfire across high society group chats, country club message boards, and corporate networks. My phone began buzzing relentlessly with alerts from my public relations team, warning me about the rapidly escalating crisis. I sat in my penthouse office reading the slanderous article on my digital tablet. My public relations director, a sharp woman named Sarah, stood in front of my desk looking deeply concerned. She strongly advised releasing a carefully worded press statement to deny the allegations and protect my corporate image. I shook my head and tossed the tablet onto my desk. I did not bother with public relations. I never played defense in the court of public opinion. I went straight to the money, Find out exactly who owns the parent company of that miserable gossip blog, I commanded, pulling up my financial terminals. Patricia thinks she can use cheap internet rumors to bring down a billionaire. She has absolutely no idea how corporate leverage actually works. It took Kira less than 10 minutes to uncover the corporate structure behind the blog. The site was owned by a struggling media conglomerate. More importantly, they were drowning in high-interest corporate debt. They owed over $8 million to a regional bank and were 2 months behind on payments. I smiled. The solution was incredibly simple and entirely lethal. Contact the regional bank right now, I instructed my legal team, who had quickly assembled in my office. Z Elite Concierge is buying the $8 million debt portfolio of that media conglomerate. Offer the bank a premium for an immediate transfer of the paper. I want to be their sole creditor by dinner time. My attorneys executed the buyout with terrifying speed. By 6 o'clock, I held their financial life in my hands. I personally dialed the direct line of the conglomerate's chief executive officer. He sounded highly stressed. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I calmly informed him my corporation had purchased his debt. I told him that I was well aware of his missed payments, and I possessed the full legal right to force his company into immediate bankruptcy and liquidate his assets by morning. The executive panicked, frantically begging for a grace period. I gave him a very simple, non-negotiable ultimatum. You have exactly 12 hours to completely retract the defamatory article about me. I ordered my tone, leaving zero room for debate. You will scrub it from every platform you control. Furthermore, you will publish a highly visible, unconditional public apology on your front page. You will state clearly the information was provided by a malicious source named Patricia, admitting the claims were entirely fabricated. If you fail to meet these demands by 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will dissolve your company and you will lose everything. The executive agreed instantly, stammering his profound apologies through the phone. I hung up the line and leaned back in my chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. My mother thought she could play a dirty game of social sabotage. She had brought a cheap rumor to a massive corporate war. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the internet had been completely scrubbed clean. The vicious article was entirely gone. In its place was a massive front-page apology retracting every single claim and explicitly naming Patricia as the malicious source of the fabricated lies. The elite social circles of Atlanta woke up to the undeniable proof that my mother was a desperate, lying manipulator. Patricia had tried to dig my grave, but she had only succeeded in burying herself alive, while my mother was drowning in the fallout of her failed public relations stunt. A much darker, far more permanent tragedy was unfolding for my sister. I would not find out the exact, horrifying details until a bit later. But while my parents were frantically pacing their heavily mortgaged living room, Bianca was living a psychological nightmare. When Julian stormed off the country club terrace after viciously slapping her, he had not actually driven away. He had parked his Aston Martin just outside the gated exit, waiting like a desperate predator in the shadows. When Patricia and Marcus finally emerged from the club, entirely consumed by their own financial panic, they had foolishly told Bianca to wait by the valet stand while they dealt with the furious club manager. That was when Julian struck. He pulled up to the curb, threw the passenger door open, and aggressively ordered Bianca to get inside. She was terrified, her cheek still stinging and heavily bruised from his violent physical assault. But the lifelong conditioning of her toxic upbringing immediately kicked in. She had been trained since birth to submit to wealthy men, to preserve the image of high society perfection at any physical or emotional cost. Trembling and weeping, she got into his car. Julian did not apologize. He did not comfort her. As he sped down the highway toward the remote county courthouse, he subjected her to a brutal, calculated psychological dismantling.
He told her that she was completely worthless, that her family was a global laughingstock, and that no respectable man in Buckhead society would ever look at her again after the massive public humiliation she had just endured. He brilliantly gaslighted her, convincing her that Zola was the real enemy and that he was her only remaining lifeline. "If you do not walk into this courthouse and marry me right this second," Julian had threatened, his voice dripping with venom, locking the car doors so she could not escape, "I will leave you on the side of this highway. I will go to the press and tell them your father is a bankrupt fraud. You will spend the rest of your life as a poor, pathetic outcast, and everyone will laugh at you." Bianca was entirely broken. She was trapped in a suffocating delusion, completely unable to envision a life without the country club status she worshipped. Under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of the desolate county courthouse, wearing her ruined designer dress and smeared, tear-stained makeup, Bianca surrendered her entire existence. She signed the expedited marriage certificate with a violently shaking hand. There were no imported white roses, no expensive string quartets, and absolutely no prenuptial agreements. In that bleak, depressing room, Bianca willingly tethered herself to a violent abuser and fully absorbed his massive $5 million stolen debt. She traded her freedom and her soul for a fake aristocratic last name. While Bianca was sealing her own doom, I was moving to permanently seal my family's financial coffin. At 9 o'clock on Friday morning, my heavily armored Maybach pulled up to the towering glass headquarters of the First Atlanta Heritage Bank. This was the exact financial institution that held the massive mortgages on my parents' primary residential estate in Buckhead. It was the bank where Marcus had played golf with the executives for 2 decades, leveraging his fake wealth to secure massive personal loans. I did not walk into the public lobby. I was escorted directly by armed guards into the most exclusive high-security boardroom on the top floor. 4 senior bank executives and the chief executive officer were already waiting for me. These were incredibly powerful old money men who usually dictated the financial pulse of the city, but today they were sweating profusely. They stood up, nervously adjusting their silk ties, as I walked into the room, flanked by Vance and my corporate legal team. "Please take a seat, Ms. Williams," the CEO offered, his voice tight with anxiety, gesturing to the leather chair at the head of the table. I did not sit down. I walked to the head of the long mahogany table, placed my hands flat on the polished surface, and completely commanded the entire room. "Let us not waste each other's highly valuable time, gentlemen," I stated coldly, looking each man directly in the eye. "You called this emergency meeting because your risk assessment department is currently in a state of absolute panic. You hold exactly $12 million in unsecured personal loans, luxury car leases, and residential mortgages tied directly to Marcus and Patricia Williams. And thanks to my recent highly public acquisition of their downtown commercial lot, you now realize that Marcus has absolutely zero liquidity to pay you back. He is a massive toxic asset on your pristine balance sheets." The CEO swallowed hard, exchanging a terrified, nervous glance with his chief financial officer. "Ms. Williams, we have had a long-standing relationship with your father. We were hoping to restructure his debt privately, perhaps give him a 6-month grace period to liquidate some personal assets." "He does not have any personal assets," I interrupted, my voice slicing through the silent boardroom like a surgical scalpel. "He is completely bankrupt. If you give him a grace period, he will simply hide his remaining cash in offshore accounts and declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy, leaving this bank to absorb a $12 million total loss right before your quarterly earnings report. Your stock prices will plummet, and your board of directors will demand your immediate resignations." The executives shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. They knew I was absolutely right. Vance stepped forward, snapping open his sleek briefcase. He pulled out a massive, legally binding corporate contract and slid it across the table toward the CEO. Zola Concierge is prepared to do you a massive favor today, I announced, my eyes locking onto the bank president. My corporation is offering to buy out Marcus and Patricia's entire debt portfolio right this second. The mortgage on the Buckhead estate, the auto loans for Patricia's Mercedes, the outstanding balances on their platinum credit cards. I want all of it. I am offering you $8 million in pure liquid cash wired directly into your reserves within the next 60 seconds. You take a slight loss on the interest, but you immediately clear $12 million of toxic, unrecoverable debt off your books. The room went completely silent. The CFO aggressively wiped his forehead with a cloth handkerchief. Ms. Williams selling a client's primary residential mortgage to a third-party corporate entity is highly aggressive. Marcus will be completely devastated. I leaned forward, my expression completely devoid of mercy or hesitation. If you do not sign that contract in the next 30 seconds, I will personally withdraw the $500 million in corporate liquidity that Zola Concierge currently holds in your bank. I will transfer every single penny to your largest global competitor before lunch, and I will let the financial press know exactly why I lost faith in your institution. The threat was absolute nuclear leverage. The CEO's eyes widened in sheer terror. Losing my corporate accounts would trigger a massive panic and likely cost him his job by the end of the week. He did not say another word. He practically ripped the cap off his Mont Blanc pen, reached across the table, and signed his name on the dotted line with a violently shaking hand. The other executives quickly followed suit, legally transferring the entire financial existence of my parents directly over to my corporation. "A pleasure doing business with you, gentlemen," I said smoothly, handing the executed contracts back to Vance. I walked out of the towering bank headquarters into the bright morning sun, feeling an overwhelming, intoxicating surge of pure power. Marcus and Patricia did not just lose their business. They had just lost the actual roof over their heads, the cars in their driveway, and the very beds they slept in. I officially owned their entire world. My private cell phone suddenly began to ring. I glanced down at the glowing screen and saw a blocked number. I answered cautiously. It was Eleanor Julian's terrifying mother begging me for a highly secretive, urgent meeting. I agreed to meet her at a secluded, dimly lit corner booth, hidden deep inside the luxurious St. Regis Hotel lounge. When Eleanor finally arrived, she was completely stripped of her usual aristocratic armor and extreme arrogance. The terrifying, untouchable matriarch of the Thornton family looked like a fragile, broken woman. Her designer trench coat was wrinkled, her eyes were bloodshot, and her hands shook violently as she slid into the leather booth across from me. She did not even bother ordering a drink from the waiting waiter. She did not attempt to exchange pleasantries or maintain her high society facade. She immediately reached across the polished wooden table and grabbed my hand with a desperate, crushing grip. "Zola, you have to help me," Eleanor pleaded, her voice cracking under the immense weight of her absolute terror. "You are the only person in this entire city with the financial liquidity and the corporate power to make this nightmare go away." I slowly pulled my hand out of her frantic grasp and leaned back firmly against the dark leather seat. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. "You have a lot of nerve calling me after the pathetic spectacle your son caused at the country club. Julian viciously assaulted my sister in public and threw a massive tantrum like a spoiled, entitled child. Why on earth would I help your family?" Eleanor swallowed hard, fresh tears welling in her eyes. "Because my son is going to federal prison, Zola, or worse. He is going to be killed." That caught my attention. I remained silent, allowing her to spill the ugly truth she had been hiding behind her gated mansion. Eleanor took a ragged breath and confessed everything. "Julian did not just make bad investments. He foolishly embezzled $5 million from Vanguard Citadel, a highly dangerous private equity firm run by ruthless people. He falsely thought he could easily double the stolen money in offshore accounts and quietly replace the principal before the strict quarterly audits. He lost every single penny. Vanguard discovered the massive discrepancy 2 days ago. They gave him an ultimatum. If he does not return the $5 million by this Friday, they are handing the evidence straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And knowing the people who run Vanguard, they might just hire someone to break his legs before the feds even arrive. I stared at her, processing the sheer magnitude of Julian's staggering stupidity and entitlement. He was not just an arrogant trust fund baby. He was a desperate, cornered criminal. He had targeted Bianca specifically because he believed Marcus's lies about the downtown commercial lot. Julian thought he could quickly liquidate the real estate to cover his massive stolen debt. When I exposed my father's bankruptcy at the bridal shower, I had, unknowingly, destroyed Julian's only lifeline.
You manage billions of dollars, Zola, Eleanor cried, leaning forward until her face was inches from mine. You move money across international borders every single day. I know you hate Patricia and Marcus. I know they treated you like absolute garbage, but you and I have a mutual respect as powerful businesswomen. I am begging you, mother to daughter, please, use your vast wealth to bail Julian out. I will sign over the deed to my personal estate. I will owe you a massive favor in the corporate sector. Just write the check and save my boy. I looked at the pathetic, desperate tears streaming rapidly down Eleanor's aging face as she continued weeping. I felt absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust for this truly miserable family. Mutual respect, I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. You think we share mutual respect because we both wear designer suits and control corporate portfolios? Let me make something incredibly clear to you, Eleanor. I built my empire by fixing problems for powerful people who pay me handsomely. I do not run a charity for incompetent, thieving little boys who play with stolen money. Eleanor gasped, shrinking back into her seat as my words sliced through the air. But more importantly, I continued, leaning forward and locking my eyes directly onto hers. Your son laid his hands on my sister. He forcefully struck Bianca right across the face in front of a massive crowd of horrified people. I may despise my parents, and I may have completely disowned my sister for her toxic behavior, but I draw a very hard, permanent line. I utterly destroy abusers. I will never, under any circumstances, use my money to save a man who hits women. Julian foolishly dug his own miserable grave. Now he gets to lie in it. Zola, please, Eleanor sobbed, covering her face with her trembling hands. He was just stressed. He lost his temper because of the extreme financial pressure. He is not a monster. He is a violent criminal, I corrected sharply, gathering my designer handbag and preparing to leave the table. You can tell Julian to pack a very warm bag for federal prison. My security team has already compiled the footage of his assault at the country club. If you try to contact me again, I will personally hand that video over to the local police and press charges on Bianca's behalf. I started to slide out of the plush leather booth, completely finished with this pathetic conversation. I was ready to walk out of the hotel and leave the Thornton family to their total ruin. But Eleanor suddenly lunged across the table. She grabbed my wrist with a terrifying, wild desperation. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely manic. You do not understand what is happening right now, Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with a sickening, raw panic. Julian did not storm out and leave your sister at the country club. He did not break off the engagement like he screamed he would. That was all a massive, calculated lie to distract your parents. I stopped moving. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. What are you talking about? Eleanor let out a broken, agonizing sob. Julian kidnapped Bianca right after he left the terrace. He drove her straight to the remote county courthouse in absolute secret. He forced her to sign a quickie marriage certificate through pure physical intimidation. They are legally married right now, Zola. And because they do not have a prenuptial agreement, Bianca is now legally, permanently tied to his $5 million stolen debt. She will be forced to serve his brutal prison sentence.
Her entire fake life is completely over right now.
I stared at Eleanor's tear-streaked face as the absolute magnitude of Julian's sinister trap settled into the quiet space between us. Bianca was officially married to a violent criminal and tethered to a massive stolen debt. Eleanor expected me to gasp, to cry, or to immediately reach for my checkbook to save my flesh and blood. Instead, I simply picked up my designer handbag and slid out of the leather booth. I looked down at the weeping matriarch with zero sympathy.
I told her that Bianca made her own miserable bed the moment she chose status over basic human decency. I advised Eleanor to hire a phenomenal defense attorney for her son, and walked straight out of the luxurious hotel lounge. By the time Friday evening arrived, the high society circles of Atlanta were buzzing with frantic whispered rumors about my family's rapid financial decline. Patricia, absolutely desperate to prove her family was still fabulously wealthy and to save face right before the formal wedding reception scheduled for Saturday, decided to host a massive charity gala. She rented out the most exclusive ballroom in the entire city, pouring the absolute last of her heavily borrowed funds into an extravagant, desperate illusion of prosperity. She wanted to show the elite club members that the vicious gossip blog apology was just a minor hurdle. Behind the scenes, my mother had explicitly instructed the elite door staff to ban me from the premises, providing them with my photograph and strict orders to call the police if I even stepped onto the pristine property. Patricia severely underestimated exactly how the ultra-wealthy operate in this city.
I did not sneak through a back door or use a fake name. I arrived at the grand entrance in a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce, wearing a breathtaking custom emerald green evening gown that radiated undeniable power. I walked right through the towering front doors, entirely ignoring the velvet ropes and the bewildered security guards. The grand ballroom was packed with Atlanta's most influential politicians, wealthy socialites, and prominent business owners. Patricia was standing near the towering champagne fountain, wearing a heavily beaded dress, laughing loudly with a group of wealthy investors. When her eyes scanned the room and locked onto me, her fake, joyful laugh abruptly died in her throat. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She immediately dropped her crystal flute onto a passing tray and marched aggressively across the crowded ballroom floor, signaling violently to the head of security. She intercepted me right in the middle of the room, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss meant only for my ears. She demanded to know how I bypassed the armed guards and ordered me to leave before she had me dragged out in handcuffs.
She told me I was a disgraceful monster who had no right to breathe the same air as her distinguished guests. I did not back away or lower my gaze. I simply smiled, waiting for the inevitable intervention I had carefully orchestrated. Before the security guards could even reach out to grab my arms, the executive gala director rushed through the crowd, waving his hands frantically to stop them. He stepped directly between me and my furious mother, shooting Patricia a look of sheer, unhidden panic. He grabbed a microphone from a nearby podium, his voice booming over the elegant string quartet playing in the background. He enthusiastically welcomed everyone to the event and then loudly announced my presence to the entire room. He declared that I was the anonymous platinum sponsor who had personally funded the entire luxurious night. He revealed that my corporation had donated the massive sums of money required to secure the venue, the catering, and the elite entertainment. The wealthy guests immediately broke into loud, admiring applause, raising their glasses in my direction. Patricia looked like she had just been struck by a high-speed train. Her jaw hung open, her eyes darting wildly around the room as the socialites she desperately wanted to impress began clapping for the daughter she had just tried to violently evict.
She was completely trapped in her own elaborate social web. She could not scream. She could not throw a tantrum. She could not kick out the sole financial savior of her own pathetic charity event without looking like a completely unhinged lunatic in front of the exact people she needed to manipulate.
Patricia was forced to choke down her boiling, toxic rage.
She rigidly pasted a terrifyingly fake, painful smile onto her face and turned toward the flashing cameras of the society photographers. I stepped right up beside her, wrapping my arm tightly around her stiff, shaking shoulders, posing for the bright flashes like the picture-perfect, generous daughter. I leaned my head close to her ear, keeping my bright smile perfectly fixed for the eager press. I whispered that her entire fake empire was resting entirely in the palm of my hand. She trembled violently, unable to say a single word as the photographers captured her ultimate crushing humiliation. For the next hour, I mingled effortlessly with the elite guests, securing powerful new corporate contracts and expanding my massive influence, while Patricia watched me with murderous, bloodshot eyes from across the room. She was completely powerless, reduced to a mere spectator at her own desperately planned party. But the absolute worst was yet to come for her carefully constructed high society facade. Right in the very middle of the lavish, multi-course dinner service, the atmosphere shifted drastically. The incredibly busy caterers suddenly dropped their expensive silver serving trays directly onto the nearest empty tables. The venue managers frantically pulled out their loudly buzzing radios, their shocked faces completely draining of all color and life. The beautiful, sweeping classical music abruptly cut off entirely, plunging the massive, densely crowded ballroom into a deafening, terrifying silence. I smiled coldly as the real chaos finally began to violently unfold right before my waiting eyes tonight. Excellent. The heavy, terrifying silence hung over the grand ballroom like a thick winter fog. The elite guests stopped talking, their crystal champagne flutes suspended in midair as they looked around in mass confusion. The venue manager, a tall man with a professional demeanor, marched briskly across the polished marble floor. He bypassed the head table completely and walked directly onto the raised main stage. He reached out and grabbed the microphone from the wooden podium. A loud feedback screech echoed through the room, causing several wealthy socialites to physically wince and cover their ears.
Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely apologize for this unexpected interruption, the venue manager announced, his amplified voice booming across the stunned crowd. He did not look at the audience. He turned and locked his eyes directly onto my mother. Patricia, we have a severe and immediate financial emergency. I need you to provide a valid payment method for this entire event right this second. Every single credit card you placed on file has just been declined. Patricia gasped out loud, dropping her silver fork onto her china plate with a loud clatter. Her face turned an alarming, blotchy shade of dark red. She jumped up from her dining chair, her heavily beaded evening gown rustling violently. "How dare you speak to me like that in front of my esteemed guests?" Patricia screeched, waving her arms in pure outrage. "There must be some kind of banking error. Run the primary corporate cards again, immediately. Do you have any idea who my powerful husband is?" The venue manager did not back down an inch. He held up a thick stack of printed banking notices for the entire room to clearly see. "We ran every single card 3 times, Patricia. Your primary accounts, your secondary accounts, and your corporate credit lines are all completely frozen. The automated banking alerts state that your accounts are locked due to massive outstanding debts and an active property foreclosure. You do not have a single penny to your name. If you do not provide a valid wire transfer in the next 5 minutes, I am legally required to order the catering staff to pack up the food and shut down this venue." A collective, horrified gasp swept through the crowded ballroom. The wealthy politicians, elite business owners, and prominent socialites immediately began murmuring frantically to one another. The pristine illusion of my family's generational wealth shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of their eyes.
People in Buckhead society could tolerate a lot of terrible things, but absolute bankruptcy was considered a highly contagious disease. I watched with deep satisfaction as dozens of guests discreetly reached into their designer purses and tailored suit jackets. They pulled out their smartphones and began aggressively texting, recording audio, and snapping photos of my humiliated mother. Marcus, my father, remained glued to his chair, staring blankly at the table as his fake empire finally crumbled into dust. He could not even muster the courage to stand up and defend his furious wife. Patricia realized she was rapidly losing control of the room. She spun around wildly, her eyes darting through the crowd until they locked directly onto me. Her terror instantly morphed into a blind, unhinged rage. She pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my face. "It was her!" Patricia screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with sheer hysteria. "My evil, jealous daughter did this to us. Zola is a dangerous, vindictive hacker. She illegally manipulated our secure banking accounts just to ruin this beautiful charity event out of pure, unadulterated spite. She is trying to destroy our prominent family because she is a miserable, lonely house cleaner who hates our massive success." I did not flinch, and I certainly did not break my calm, powerful posture. I simply stood there in my custom emerald green gown, radiating an untouchable, quiet dominance. I let her scream. I let her unravel completely. "Arrest her right now!" Patricia hollered, stepping aggressively toward the crowd. "Someone call the police and have this thieving maid dragged out of here in handcuffs!" When I did not react to her insane accusations, Patricia turned desperately toward the tables closest to the stage. She looked directly at her closest country club friends, the elite women she had spent decades trying to impress. "Margaret Cynthia, please!" Patricia begged, her voice dropping into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "You know me. You know our family is incredibly wealthy. Tell this venue manager that we are good for the money. Defend my honor against this psychotic girl." I watched as Margaret and Cynthia exchanged a rapid, terrified glance. They did not step forward to help her. Instead, they physically took a large step backward, creating a clear, undeniable distance between themselves and my mother. The other wealthy guests followed their lead, practically shrinking away from Patricia as if she were covered in deadly venom. Nobody wanted to be publicly associated with a bankrupt, screaming woman whose credit cards had just bounced at her own lavish charity gala. The absolute rejection was brutal, swift, and completely devastating. Patricia stood entirely alone in the center of the vast, luxurious ballroom. Her shoulders slumped forward, and she let out a loud, agonizing sob of pure defeat. She realized that her fake friends only cared about her money, and since the money was gone, she was completely worthless to them. Just as the venue manager raised his radio to officially order the hardworking staff to completely shut down the massive event, the towering mahogany doors at the main entrance swung wide open with a massive, heavy thud. The sudden noise echoed sharply, drawing the attention of every single person in the room. I turned my head toward the grand entrance, a cold, victorious smile spreading across my face. Eleanor walked through the towering mahogany doors like an absolute force of nature. She wore a tailored black evening gown that commanded immediate respect. 3 heavily influential billionaires' men who controlled massive portions of the global economy walked perfectly in step right behind her. Their collective presence radiated an overwhelming, suffocating amount of power. The entire ballroom remained completely paralyzed in a state of absolute shock. The elite socialites who had been mocking my mother only seconds ago instantly held their breath. They recognized true wealth when they saw it. Patricia let out a loud, desperate gasp of pure relief. She genuinely believed her ultimate salvation had just arrived to rescue her from this waking nightmare. My mother quickly smoothed down the front of her heavily beaded dress and sprinted frantically across the polished marble floor. She threw her arms out wide, preparing to embrace the wealthy matriarch of the prestigious Thornton family.
Eleanor, thank goodness you are finally here, Patricia cried out, her voice echoing with a pathetic, high-pitched whine.
You have to help me right this second. My evil, jealous daughter hacked all of my private banking accounts just to ruin this beautiful charity event. Zola is a dangerous criminal who wants to destroy our prominent family reputation. Please tell this horrible venue manager that our family is incredibly wealthy and completely good for the money.
Eleanor did not open her arms to embrace my mother.
She did not offer a single word of polite comfort. She stopped walking, planted her feet firmly on the marble floor, and raised her right hand high into the air. With terrifying speed and absolute precision, Eleanor slapped Patricia violently across the face. The sharp, cracking sound of the physical strike echoed like a massive gunshot across the dead-silent ballroom. Patricia stumbled backward, clutching her stinging cheek in sheer, unadulterated horror. She let out a small, confused whimper, completely unable to process the brutal physical violence she had just endured from her new aristocratic relative.
Do not ever speak to me again, you disgusting, pathetic fraud!
Eleanor roared, her voice vibrating with a lethal, icy rage that made the surrounding guests physically step back in fear.
You are nothing but a desperate, broke liar. Your entire family is completely bankrupt. You do not have a single penny to your miserable name. You maliciously lied to my face for months,
and you orchestrated a disgusting trap to force my son into a legally binding marriage to absorb your massive financial debts. Patricia shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. No, Eleanor, that is not true. We are a powerful family. We own a massive commercial real estate empire in the downtown district. Zola is just a lowly house cleaner who stole our identity. She is making all of this up to ruin Bianca. Eleanor let out a loud, harsh laugh, devoid of any humor. She turned her body away from my weeping mother and looked directly across the grand ballroom. She locked her sharp eyes right onto me, where I stood calmly in my custom emerald green gown. Eleanor slowly raised her hand and pointed a single trembling finger straight at my face.
You are an absolute fool, Patricia, Eleanor announced to the entire crowded room, making sure every single wealthy politician and elite business owner heard her clear words. That woman standing right over there is not a dirty maid. She does not scrub toilets. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Z Elite Concierge. She is a corporate titan who manages the private wealth of every single important person standing in this room tonight. She controls a massive portfolio worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She is the woman who actually owns the downtown commercial lot you falsely claimed as your own. The three powerful billionaires, standing directly behind Eleanor, firmly nodded their heads in absolute agreement. One of the men, a prominent real estate mogul, took a confident step forward to publicly validate my immense power. Zola Williams is the sole reason my corporation avoided a massive tax disaster last quarter, the billionaire stated loudly. She is a brilliant financial strategist, and she is the only person in this city I trust with my assets. Patricia, you are a complete disgrace for treating your own highly successful daughter like garbage. The absolute confirmation from the most powerful men in the room completely destroyed my mother's remaining sanity. Her fragile, carefully constructed high society illusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Patricia let out a devastating, agonizing wail of pure defeat. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the cold marble floor, landing directly in a messy pile of her own expensive beaded gown. She buried her face in her trembling hand, sobbing uncontrollably as the elite socialites she worshipped looked down at her with complete, unfiltered disgust. She had officially lost absolutely everything. Julian stumbled blindly into the bright center of the massive grand ballroom, smelling of expensive scotch
and sheer desperation. He violently shoved past the paralyzed elite socialites, marching directly toward my utterly ruined parents. He held a crisp white document high above his head, laughing with a very dark, unhinged madness that echoed loudly off the crystal chandeliers. He looked like an absolute madman, desperately searching for a way out. Patricia and Marcus stared in confusion. My mother frantically reached out, hoping Julian had brought a miraculous financial bailout to save her gala. She genuinely believed her son-in-law was going to rescue her. "Julian, thank goodness you are here!" Patricia cried out. "Please tell these people that your family is incredibly wealthy. Tell them you will cover the bill right this second." Julian did not reach for his wallet or offer a word of comfort. Instead, he threw his head back and let out a loud, maniacal laugh that sent shivers down the spines of the wealthy guests. He aggressively thrust the crumpled white paper into Patricia's face. "I am not paying for your miserable party, you bankrupt fraud!" Julian sneered, words slurring from the alcohol. "I do not have a single penny, but you and your pathetic husband are going to pay for everything I owe." Marcus stepped forward, his face turning red. "Watch your tone when you speak to my wife. What on earth are you talking about? You are supposed to be an aristocratic billionaire. You promised to elevate our legacy." "Your legacy is completely worthless," Julian shouted back, waving the paper wildly. "And so is my family trust fund. I embezzled $5 million from a dangerous private equity firm. I stole the money because my aristocratic family is drowning in debt. I needed your downtown commercial lot to cover my tracks before the authorities throw me in a cell for the rest of my life. But since you lied about owning that real estate, I secured a different insurance policy." Julian faced the horrified crowd. He held the document up for everyone to clearly see the official state seals stamped at the bottom. "This is a legally binding marriage certificate," Julian announced with a wicked grin. "Bianca and I did not break off the engagement. I drove her straight to the courthouse yesterday afternoon. We are officially legally married as of 24 hours ago." A loud gasp rippled through the ballroom. Eleanor closed her eyes and shook her head in sheer disgust. "And the best part," Julian continued, "we did not sign a prenuptial agreement. That means my perfect new wife is now legally tied to my financial liabilities. Bianca, and by extension this pathetic family, is entirely responsible for my $5 million stolen debt. If I go down for corporate fraud, your precious golden child is going down right beside me." The reality of his sinister trap crashed down upon my family. Bianca, who had been hiding near the back, let out a devastating shriek. She sprinted across the marble floor, her expensive designer dress tearing as she pushed through the crowd. "You told me the courthouse marriage was just a romantic secret," Bianca sobbed, grabbing Julian by his suit jacket. "You told me we would still have the lavish wedding reception tomorrow. You promised me a perfect high society life." Julian violently shoved her off him. "You wanted a wealthy white husband to show off on the internet, Bianca? You got exactly what you asked for. Now start scrubbing toilets like your sister if you want to stay out of federal prison." Bianca fell hard to her knees, weeping hysterically against the cold marble floor. The flawless illusion she had spent her entire life cultivating was completely destroyed. She realized she had willingly married an abusive, broke monster just to keep up appearances for people who did not even care about her. Her fairy tale romance was a calculated, lethal prison sentence. Marcus clutched his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. He staggered backward, leaning heavily against a dining table to keep himself from collapsing. He had lost his commercial real estate empire, his social standing, and now his favorite daughter was legally bound to a massive criminal enterprise. He had absolutely nothing left. The proud, arrogant patriarch was utterly broken. Patricia dropped to her knees beside Bianca, wrapping her arms around her sobbing daughter.
The wealthy socialites they had tried so desperately to impress turned away from them in pure disgust. Nobody wanted to look at the wreckage of a fraudulent family. Slowly, Patricia raised her tear-streaked face from the floor. Her bloodshot eyes darted across the ballroom until they locked directly onto me. Marcus lifted his head and stared at me too. Bianca stopped weeping for a brief second and looked up at my custom emerald green gown. They all realized the exact same thing at the exact same time. I was the chief executive officer of a massive corporate conglomerate. I managed hundreds of millions of dollars. I was the only person in the entire city with the liquidity and the raw power to pay off Vanguard Citadel and save Bianca from going to federal prison. I was their ultimate salvation, their only remaining hope in the world. Patricia opened her mouth, preparing to beg for my mercy. She was getting ready to ask the daughter she had just tried to violently evict to immediately write a $5 million check. I did not give her the chance to speak a single word. I looked down at my weeping mother, my broken father, and my devastated sister. My expression was completely unreadable. I felt absolutely zero pity for the people who had treated me like garbage for 33 years. I slowly adjusted my diamond earrings and offered them a cold, merciless smile. "I will see you all at the formal wedding reception tomorrow afternoon," I commanded very smoothly. "Do not dare be late." The formal wedding reception was held on Saturday afternoon at the most exclusive, breathtaking ballroom in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Bianca had spent a painstaking year obsessing over every single detail of this room. She had ordered thousands of imported white roses to cascade from the crystal chandeliers, secured a world-renowned string quartet, and curated a menu that cost more than most people made in a decade. It was designed to be the ultimate coronation of her high society life. Instead, it was a magnificent, echoing ghost town. Because of the catastrophic, highly public financial disaster at the charity gala the night before, not a single high society guest showed up. The elite politicians, the wealthy socialites, and the prominent business owners had all completely abandoned my family. The hundreds of gold-trimmed chairs sat totally empty. The massive crystal champagne towers remained untouched. The only attendees in the vast, echoing ballroom were three heavily built, shadowy men wearing cheap, ill-fitting suits. They stood silently by the main exits, their arms crossed, radiating a dark, aggressive menace. They were Julian's creditors from Vanguard Citadel, and they had not come for a slice of wedding cake. They were waiting for their $5 million. In the center of the empty dance floor, Bianca was having a complete psychological breakdown. She was drowning in a $20,000 custom designer wedding gown, her perfectly applied makeup completely ruined by hysterical, violent sobbing. "You have to give me an annulment," Bianca shrieked, her voice echoing pathetically off the high ceilings as she grabbed Julian's tuxedo lapels. "This is a complete nightmare. I am not going to federal prison for your disgusting crimes. We can rip up the certificate right now." Julian, looking highly sleep-deprived and sweating profusely under the gaze of his hovering creditors, violently pushed Bianca away. The sheer force of his shove sent her stumbling backward until she tripped over the massive train of her own dress, collapsing onto the polished hardwood floor. "Shut your mouth, you pathetic, whining liability," Julian spat, his aristocratic mask completely replaced by the viciousness of a cornered rat. "You wanted a rich, white, old-money husband to show off on your shallow Instagram account? You wanted the status. Well, you got exactly what you asked for. Now get up and figure out how to pay my bills, because those men at the door are going to break my legs, and you are legally going down right beside me." Before Bianca could let out another agonizing wail, the towering oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The string quartet, who had been sitting frozen in the corner, nervously adjusted their instruments, but no music played. I walked slowly down the center aisle, wearing a perfectly tailored, blood-red designer suit that contrasted violently with the sea of untouched white florals.
I was not alone. I was flanked by Vance, my ruthless lead corporate attorney, and 4 members of my elite private security team, who immediately formed an impenetrable perimeter around me. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor was the only noise in the room. I had finally arrived. The moment my family saw me, whatever microscopic shred of high society pride they had left completely evaporated. They did not see the daughter they had abused, neglected, and humiliated for 33 years. They only saw a walking, breathing bank vault. Marcus, Patricia, and Bianca practically scrambled across the empty dance floor, rushing toward the front pew where I calmly took a seat. Patricia threw herself to her knees right at my feet, her hands desperately grabbing the fabric of my red trousers. She was weeping so hard she was hyperventilating. "Please, Zola, I am begging you," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You own massive companies. Please, just write the check. Pay off his stolen debt. You have to save your sister from going to federal prison for his horrible fraud." Marcus fell to his knees right beside her, his hands clasped together in a pathetic prayer. "We were wrong, Zola. We were so foolish. I will give you anything you want. Just, please, issue a wire transfer so those dangerous men will leave us alone." I did not flinch. I did not pull my leg away from my mother's grasp. I simply looked down at them with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter ocean. I slowly stood up, forcing Patricia to release my suit, and looked directly into my mother's terrified, bloodshot eyes. "Save her," I asked, my voice deadly quiet, echoing through the empty hall. "Let me tell you a story about saving people, Patricia." I took a slow step forward, towering over them. "When I was 15 years old, my appendix ruptured in the middle of the night. I was screaming in absolute agony on the floor of our house. You finally took me to the emergency room, but you did not stay. You left me completely alone in a sterile hospital bed, terrified and prepping for emergency surgery because Bianca needed you to take her shopping for a designer prom dress the very next morning. I heard you tell the nurses that you had given up on me and that I was just being dramatic to steal attention from the golden child." Patricia gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling hands as the ghosts of her own cruelty came back to haunt her. "I faced that surgery completely alone," I whispered, delivering the final crushing blow. "I didn't save you then, and I am absolutely not going to save you now." Julian, entirely impatient and unable to read the terrifying shift in the room's dynamic, stormed over. He puffed out his chest, desperately, trying to project his usual arrogant authority. "Enough with the pathetic family drama," Julian demanded, snapping his fingers in my direction. "You have the cash, Zola. Write the damn check to my creditors right now so we can all go home and put this miserable nightmare behind us." I turned my gaze away from my weeping family and looked directly at Julian. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. I did not reach into my designer handbag for a checkbook. Instead, I raised a single hand and signaled my lead attorney. Vance stepped forward, his face completely devoid of emotion. He did not hand Julian a check. He forcefully shoved a thick, heavy legal binder directly into Julian's chest. "What the hell is this?" Julian sneered, nearly dropping the heavy file. He ripped it open fully, expecting to see a non-disclosure agreement or a loan contract. I watched closely as his arrogant, condescending eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. It took exactly 10 seconds for the reality to set in. The smug, entitled color violently drained from Julian's face, leaving him looking like a pale, sickly ghost. His breathing hitched. His hands began shaking so violently that he could no longer hold the weight of the binder. It slipped through his fingers and crashed loudly onto the floor, scattering crisp documents stamped with federal banking seals. "You really think I just ignored your little Vanguard Citadel problem?" I asked smoothly, stepping right into his personal space. "My corporation, Z Elite Concierge, specializes in acquiring distressed debt. Last night, through a proxy LLC, I completely bought out your massive debt portfolio from Vanguard. I paid them the $5 million you stole, plus a premium for their silence." Julian stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing in sheer terror. "Those men standing by the doors do not work for Vanguard anymore," I continued, gesturing to the shadowy creditors who were now nodding respectfully in my direction. "They work for me. I am your sole creditor, Julian, and more importantly, when I bought your debt, I also legally acquired all of the internal audit files, the server logs, and the undeniable proof of your wire fraud." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "I hold the exact evidence required to put you in a federal penitentiary for 20 consecutive years." Julian's legs completely gave out. The arrogant, old money aristocrat who had thrown a restaurant bill at me, who had slapped my sister, and who had tried to evict me from my own property, collapsed to his knees right in front of my designer shoes. "Please," Julian choked out, tears of absolute terror streaming down his face. "Please, Zola. I am so sorry. I will do anything. Have mercy on me." "Mercy is for people who ask for it before they get caught," I replied, my voice echoing with total, unbreakable authority. I looked at Bianca, who was still paralyzed on the floor, staring in horror at the legal documents scattered around her husband's knees. "Here are the new rules," I announced to the silent, devastated room. "I am absolutely refusing to grant or fund any legal annulment. You two forged this legally binding, miserable union to exploit each other, and now you are going to stay securely chained to it. You are entirely responsible for the $5 million debt, plus a massive corporate interest rate." Bianca let out a strangled sob, burying her face in the tulle of her ruined wedding dress. "To help you pay off this staggering debt, my company has graciously provided you both with immediate employment," I stated coldly. Z Elite owns a highly profitable commercial sanitation subsidiary. Starting at 6 o'clock on Monday morning, both of you will be working minimum wage shifts. You will be wearing heavy rubber gloves, and you will literally be scrubbing the toilets in my corporate buildings. If you miss a single shift, or if you miss a single monthly payment, Vance will instantly submit the fraud binder to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you will both be arrested before dinner. Julian buried his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably into the polished hardwood floor. Bianca was completely catatonic. I looked past them, locking eyes with Marcus and Patricia one last time. They were completely bankrupt. The commercial lot was gone. Their credit lines were dead. Because of the public humiliation at the gala, they had been permanently blacklisted from every country club, bank, and social circle in Atlanta. By next week, they would be evicted from their heavily mortgaged Buckhead estate and forced to live in a tiny, cramped, rented apartment, entirely shunned by the society they had sacrificed their own daughter for. They had absolutely nothing left. The kingdom of lies had burned to the ground. I did not offer a goodbye. I simply turned around and walked back down the center aisle of the empty, lavish ballroom. My security team fell perfectly into step behind me. The heavy oak doors opened, and I stepped out of the suffocating venue and into the bright, warm Atlanta sun. My chauffeur was waiting beside my pristine black Rolls-Royce. He opened the door, bowing slightly, as I slid into the luxurious leather back seat. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water exactly like the one Bianca had spilled on me just a few weeks ago. I picked up my iPad, reviewed the final terms of a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition, and smoothly signed my name on the digital dotted line. I took a slow sip of the cold water, looking out the tinted window as the car pulled away from the ruined wedding venue, and smiled. The ultimate sweet revenge wasn't just survival, it was total, unbreakable power.
6 months after the ghost town wedding reception, the brutal reality of my edict had fully settled over the Thornton and Williams families. I did not just make empty threats in that lavish, abandoned ballroom. I enforced every single word with ruthless precision. It was currently 4 o'clock in the morning on a freezing Tuesday in January. Inside one of the towering, prestigious corporate skyscrapers owned by Z Elite Concierge, the night shift of my sanitation subsidiary was hard at work. Julian Thornton, a man whose manicured hands used to swirl expensive aged bourbon, was currently wearing a shapeless, dark gray industrial jumpsuit. He was pushing a heavy, waterlogged mop across the polished marble lobby, his face pale, gaunt, and completely stripped of his former aristocratic arrogance. A few feet away, Bianca was down on her knees. The family's undisputed golden child, who had once sobbed hysterically over a splashed silk dress, was now wearing thick yellow rubber gloves. She scrubbed the baseboards with a stiff brush, her hair tied back in a messy, sweat-soaked knot. There were no flashing cameras here. There were no elite country club friends to admire her status. They were not allowed to speak to the corporate executives who walked past them during the day shift. If they were even 1 minute late to clock in, Vance's legal team immediately sent an automated warning regarding the Vanguard fraud files. They were trapped in a miserable, exhausting cycle of minimum wage labor, quietly chipping away at a $5 million mountain of debt that would take them multiple lifetimes to clear. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, on the absolute fringes of the city limits, Marcus and Patricia were waking up in their new reality. They lived in a cramped, 600-square-foot apartment positioned directly next to a noisy, elevated highway. The walls were paper-thin, and the air always smelled faintly of cheap frying oil. Patricia, who used to spend her mornings ordering imported caviar for exclusive verandas, was currently standing in the checkout line of a discount grocery store. She kept her head down, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her deeply aged, exhausted face. Just last week she had spotted Margaret and Cynthia, her former best friends from the Jack and Jill Club, walking out of a high-end boutique downtown. Patricia had instinctively raised her hand to wave, desperate for a shred of her old life. Margaret had looked her dead in the eye, turned her head completely in the opposite direction, and kept walking as if Patricia were nothing more than a ghost. The absolute social erasure had broken my mother's spirit far more effectively than the bankruptcy ever could. As for me, I stood quietly on the sweeping balcony of my $30 million penthouse, wrapped in a heavy cashmere coat. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the sprawling Atlanta skyline, painting the glass skyscrapers in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I held a steaming cup of black coffee, watching the city wake up beneath my feet. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel the heavy, suffocating weight of being the family disappointment. The toxic chains of my past had been entirely severed, melted down and reforged into an empire that nobody could ever take away from me. I took a slow, deep breath of the crisp winter air, turned my back on the city, and walked back inside my flawless sanctuary to conquer the rest of the world.